Next up, we were looking at these specific companies here and how they were performing, but let's look at the overall US economy and what the US economy is doing. The GDP numbers came out, and you had GDP came in at around 33.1% growth on an annualized basis. That's actually a record. 33.1%. These numbers, well, let me go into more detail here. If you look at it from the previous quarter, it's actually only up 7.4%, but you do these kind of different annualized basis where you're looking at it for like, okay, what would it be for the year based on what we did this quarter? And that's where you get that 33.1%. So this is the largest 3-month increase on record from last quarter to this quarter, where we had that 7.4%. And you look traditionally what America has done in the past, you're looking usually about like 4% a year in GDP growth. So to see these kind of crazy numbers around the pandemic is very, very different from what is norm. Even in places like in China or in India, maybe like if you had 15% or 18% GDP growth, that would be considered a high. And this one is saying, around 33.1% growth right now. It's just kind of all over the place. The decline in April, May, and June, that one was actually 31.4% GDP loss on that. So that was the largest decline in history. So we had the largest decline followed up by the largest gain. And that quarter was actually down 9% from the previous quarter. That's when we were going into the pandemic here. The overall economy, though, is looking to be about 3.5% smaller this year at the close of this year than it was in 2019. That's not good news. So if you were looking at this in terms of what numbers do we actually have to achieve here to kind of have positive GDP growth for the year, the third quarter needed to grow at least 45.7% just to kind of break even, to have 0% growth in GDP for the year to make up for everything that we've lost. It had to actually grow at 63% to kind of wipe out all of the losses and have a significant growth for the year. So, those numbers, I don't even know how you can relate to a 63% growth in GDP for a year is unheard of. And if you're looking at this last quarter that we actually had our growth here, our record growth, that also included CARES Act spending. So we had the federal government instituting spending programs. This one totaled $2.2 trillion. And on top of that, you had the Federal Reserve easing interest rates. You had the Federal Reserve also doing monetary stimulus, buying up bonds, buying up corporate bonds. They had them doing a lot of different things there. Their balance sheet went up to over $7 trillion now. So you had all of that kind of injections of capital there to kind of put the economy on steroids. And that's why, or that's one of the reasons why we had this jump back now and going up 7.4% from the previous quarter. But what's going to happen when next quarter occurs and we don't have that and we're potentially going back into lockdown? So we'll have to see where it goes from there. Next up, we have some consumer products companies that were reporting earnings. So we talked about Procter & Gamble reporting in the past. They were doing pretty well during this whole pandemic. A lot of their sales were up. Now we have Colgate Palmolive. They reported earnings of 79 cents a share, which was 9 cents higher than the estimates. That's pretty significant. Honeywell earned $1.56 per share, which was 7 cents above estimates. So we had those two big ones there. Next up, we had Starbucks, which is starting to open some of their stores. They earned 51 cents a share, which was above estimates by 20 cents. Pretty significant. They are actually expecting sales growth in 2021. A lot of other companies, they don't even want to talk about next year because they basically have no idea. They don't want to give any guidance. And Starbucks here is actually saying that they expect sales growth next year. Now, there's something we have to talk about here. So we have some unrest going on in France. I don't know what's the correct term that you would call this. Well, there's some terrible things that would happen there. We had some terrorist attacks. You had a teacher that showed a caricature of Muhammad the Prophet from the religion of Islam. And what happened was that teacher ended up getting beheaded by a kind of radical member of the Muslim society in France there. And after this, there was a lot of news. I think I talked about this in an earlier video where they were, the French President Macron was trying to go and kind of promote that they have, basically freedom of speech there. They're able to say what they're free to speak or to show pictures, whatever they want there. And it can't be hindered by somebody else's views from whether that's other countries or other cultures, it's not France, and France has a certain way, and the people living there should respect that. Well, it turns out now that the people, or some of the people living there, don't want to respect that, because we just had another attack, and there was an attack in a church and another beheading. So like another person had their knife to the throat kind of thing going on. And this is just terrible stuff that's going on. And it turns out a lot of these people are actually the refugees that came into France during the whole kind of the uprisings in the Middle East, and when there was a kind of a mass refugee crisis all going into Europe. So if you look at this last one, this was an attack in a church, and it was by a Tunisian refugee that originally came to Italy, and then from Italy he went to France, and he was living in France now. So it's kind of scary seeing this, that this is the fourth attack from refugees that has occurred, and France is now stepping up their kind of counterterrorism efforts. And it's really an attack on French culture, because they've decided over all these years and all their laws and systems that this is the kind of society that they want to have. They want to be able to have freedom of speech. And now it's being kind of hindered by these acts of terrorism. So France will add 4,000 soldiers and counterterrorism soldiers to what they already had in place of around 3,000. So they're now going to have around 7,000 of these kind of counterterrorism troops that are going to be going and protecting churches and schools. They also want to try and pass a new law here that they can crack down on what they deem to be kind of radical religious teachings, or, there's a lot of religious freedoms as well, just like in America. And what happens is you're not able to go and shut down people even if they're preaching kind of radical beliefs or preaching violence. And they want to try to make a law to change that. But the thing is, even though you're seeing, now we're going to see, soldiers on the streets to try and protect locations, those are not the ones that are going to get attacked. Again, it's going to be, the soft targets are going to be the ones that get attacked. You can't really police the whole country like that there. So we're going to have to see how this goes, if it's going to keep escalating. You're having now terrorist organizations in other areas speaking to this, and how, that the attacks were justified, and kind of crazy stuff like that. So we'll have to see how that plays out there. Hopefully it'll turn out all right for France. Next up, we have Netflix. So Netflix on Thursday raised their prices of their standard and premium plans to $13.99 and $17.99 per month. Now their basic plan, which nobody wants because, unless you're just watching it on the phone, you don't have HD content or anything, but that one's for $8.99 a month. The last time they raised prices was in January 2019. So, in the next year again, they're raising prices. Why are they raising prices so much so quickly, right? Well, I think we see the answer to this is because they had talked about previously spending a lot of money, and this is another tech company that's investing in capital expenditures here. They were going and purchasing all this original content, all these shows and films that were made just for Netflix, just for their platform. And you're seeing the problem with that now. The entertainment industry, the movie Hollywood kind of entertainment film industry shows, it's very difficult because you have a few really good, for every Avengers movie, you have a bunch of movies that are a bunch of just flops in the box office. For every good show, you have a bunch of shows that get canceled or end up not getting a following. And Netflix is starting to see that the hard way now. If you can look at some of those really mediocre shows and movies that they're putting out on their system, on their application now, you have a bunch of these shows that are not that great or kind of mediocre, and they still need ways to get people to come and view their platform, because now you have Disney Plus and Apple TV and Peacock and Hulu and HBO. There's so many, I can't even name them all now. There's a lot of competition there. And now they're starting to raise prices. At the same time, competitors are coming in and undercutting their price. So can they win in this content game of offering the most bang for your buck, the most good content for the amount of dollars that you have to pay for the subscription? And that is what we're going to have to see now. For the last item here, I wanted to go into something that's a bit of it's kind of an innovative science concept here called gene editing. There's a few different technologies out there, but right now there's a new report that came out with CRISPR gene editing. So the idea here is that you can cut, edit, and insert DNA directly inside a human or a human embryo. And what this can do is it can get rid of there's certain diseases and certain kind of issues with the human condition they're passed down from generation to generation. The one that they did in this study here was for people that had hereditary blindness. So it was passed down from generation to generation. And they tried to go into embryos. They had about 40 of them, 30 of them human embryos. There were about 37 of them that were used to kind of do this test on with the CRISPR gene editing and go into the EYS gene, which is directly related to the blindness. And the idea was to kind of make the edits to that gene, and it would get rid of the blindness in the next generation, in the offspring, and then future generations would no longer have that hereditary disease. So the problem with this, and the rest of those, the 37, and then the rest were the control group, this is a large kind of ethical debate on this. Do you want to have basically gene editing babies now where you're kind of making people however you want to make them? Is that ethically, is that right to do that? So maybe it's okay to do that if they have a genetic disease or something like that, but there can be massive repercussions down the road if you try and do this stuff. This study found out that the test, which was on chromosome 6, which is one of the pairs of the 23 chromosomes that human beings have, well, what ended up happening on a lot of them is that it frequently eliminated the entire chromosome or removed large sections of that chromosome. So sometimes it worked, maybe get rid of the blindness, but the other times you can completely remove a chromosome from a human being. That can have huge implications there. And another thing with this is that even if the gene splicing and editing works, what happens down the road if you take out a gene that is maybe a mutation, but it offers some kind of immunity? What if it's like something like like sickle cell anemia, or there could be something that maybe it seems like it could be a negative, but it helps in the case of you're less likely to get malaria or something like that. What if a new virus or disease comes out in the future and we're all pre-programmed to be this genetic ideal, and then this one disease can literally wipe out the human race because we're all edited down to this specific requirements that are not compatible with dealing with this virus. So that's huge there. And you also have just a concern from is this something that human beings should really have the ability to do? Should you be able to say, I want my kid to have, gray eyes. I want them to have brown eyes or blue eyes or green eyes. Can you say what color hair you want your kid to have or how tall they're going to be? What if everybody wants their offspring to be tall or short for whatever reason? And down the road, that has significant ramifications because those genes, once they're edited, it's stuck in the person's body like that, and it's going to be passed down. So whatever you do there, if there's anything that's wrong or incorrect, oh man, you can't even comprehend what could possibly go wrong with this. We could end up like with the X-Men, except that's probably a bad example because that's kind of crazy. But you could end up with some crazy genetic defects here that can go down generations and really affect large swaths of the population here. So I just wanted to bring this one up because the new study basically said that this is not ready for mainstream use yet. And they're still trying to make kind of a scientific kind of a basis for what's ethical to do here and what's not. Like, should they be doing this and should they have kind of like rules around the world that every scientist can follow on how to proceed with this? So this is not going to stop the science right now. It's still going to continue, but it brings up a lot of debates on it. And we see here that there are still issues with it, but the potential here is huge. So I'm going to leave it on that for today. That was a lot of business news. Hope you enjoyed watching. I'll see you next time.